Hello and welcome to Freedom News, the news you can use to help keep Canada free. Today I bring you a story that was broken by Global News. It concerns the Safe Third Country Agreement that exists between Canada and the United States, and I will have the link to the story in the description below. I will also include in this video the Conservatives' response to this news story via Michelle Rempel's video on her channel. At first, I think it's important that we should recap the exchange that happened between Michelle Rempel and Bill Blair, aka Minister of Nothing, on this issue back in February of this year.
Or Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for the House, let me define what virtually screened everybody means. 11,745 people were not screened. Many of them illegally entered our country. This is reported today by the Toronto Star. Is this true?
Minister of Voter Security.
And again, let me assure the member and all members in this House that every individual who arrives at our border, regardless of whether they arrive at a point of entry or irregularly at our borders, are subject to rigorous background screening to ensure there is no criminality or threat to national security. And what the member may be referring to is part of the process of determining eligibility. There are further screening background checks conducted by CBSA on behalf of IRCC to ensure that anyone who is admitted as an eligible asylum claimant in this country has been thoroughly vetted.
The Honourable Member Order for Calgary Nose Hill.
So this is a fairly easy yes or no question,
Should
and
be.
one that Canadians should have an answer to. Today, the Toronto Star reported that 11,745 people have not had their screening completed. Is this true? Yes or no?
Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to share with that member what is true. Last year, CBSA processed over 90 million entries to Canada safely and securely. As they do each year, they constantly review their processes. Every person who has arrived at our border seeking asylum, irregularly or irregular port of entry, is subject to a thorough screening before they're allowed admission. There are additional screening measures and inquiries made as part of the immigration eligibility and refugee eligibility process, and those processes continue well after the person enters the country.
I remind colleagues the idea. The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, I just asked the Minister a pretty simple question, one that he should know the answer to, ostensibly. Today, the Toronto Star reported that 11,745 people, many of whom entered our country illegally, have not had their security screening completed. Is this true? Yes or no?
Minister of Border Security.
The member's right. That is a simple question, and I will answer it this way. Everyone that enters into our country is subject to security screening by CBSA, and they do this in partnership with the RCMP and Immigration. As part of the process of determining their eligibility, there's an additional process of further screening that takes place, and there's a backlog as reported by the Toronto Star. But it's very important for all Canadians to understand there is no security threat to Canadians because every individual is screened for security concerns before they enter this country.
Order. Each side has its turn. Come on now. Hold on. Order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, one could argue that it would be difficult to evaluate if someone posed a security risk to Canada if their security screening wasn't completed.
Exactly.
So again, the Toronto Star reported that 11,745 people have not had their security screening completed. Is this true? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Border Security.
Mr. Speaker, everyone everyone who enters the country, whether irregularly or at a point of entry, is screened to determine their admissibility into the country. Everyone, 100%, as part of the process of determining their eligibility for asylum under our IRB's process, there's an additional screening that takes place. We're working hard to deal with the backlog that they left to us, Mr. Speaker, and we will complete that process before anyone is admitted as eligible for refugee status in this country.
The honourable member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
The answer to this question is not yes and no. The Prime Minister has allowed 40,000 people to illegally enter our country, and today the Toronto Star has reported that 11,745 people have not had their security screening completed. This minister is in charge of this file, in theory, so he needs to answer this question. Is the screening completed? Yes or no?
Minister of Border Security.
And with respect to everyone who comes to this country and crosses the border irregularly, they are thoroughly screened before they move forward into the process of determining their eligibility. So the answer to that question is yes. There's an additional concern because there are people, as they move through that process of determining their eligibility, CBSA, working with IRCC, does additional security screening. And that process is backlogged, and we're addressing that backlog by making significant new investments in making those processes more efficient. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. This is not a security issue.
Honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle.
Now for the news from Global News. The Safe Third Country Agreement governing asylum claims between Canada and the United States is, quote, no longer working as intended, end quote. No surprise there, according to documents prepared last year by government officials. Obtained by Global News under Access to Information Laws, memos and briefing material shared with Immigration Minister Ahmed Hussein ahead of a planned January 18, 2018 meeting with Homeland Security Secretary Christian Nielsen, which was cancelled at the last minute, raised the Safe Third Country Agreement as a key issue and described efforts to create a new steering group to address, quote, immigration issues. With the recent influx of asylum seekers to Canada, the Safe Third Country Agreement is no longer working as intended, the memo prepared for Hussein states. Asylum seekers are evading the Canada-United States Safe Third Country Agreement by crossing into Canada between ports of entry where the agreement does not apply. This has brought to our attention gaps that may be creating a pull factor for people to cross illegally into Canada. The release of the memo comes as spring nears across much of Canada, raising questions about whether there will be an increase in the number of illegal migrants crossing the border following data last year that appeared to suggest an increase between winter to spring. Data from immigration officials show that in 2018, illegal crossings in January and February stood at 1,517 and 1,565 respectively. Those increased in March, April, and May to 1,970, 2,560, and 1,869. Several months later, Hassan struck a positive tone during a press conference in May 2018, in which he praised the Safe Third Country Agreement as a great tool and amazing experience. When asked during that press conference if he was trying to get the agreement changed, Hassan repeatedly dodged questions following a statement from the Department of Homeland Security that it was evaluating a proposal from Canada to amend the agreement. He also denied any formal negotiations taking place on potential changes to the agreement. He acknowledged it was the subject of ongoing talks, though would not describe what those encompassed. Oh boy. However, the memo prepared for Hussein months prior to that press conference described efforts underway at the time to create what officials called an Assistant Deputy Minister, Assistant Secretary Steering Committee on Immigration Issues between Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and the Department of Homeland Security. While details on the proposal are scant, the memo for Hussen advised that he tell Nielsen that, quote, "My department fully supports the idea of developing a bilateral structure at the senior level for our ongoing engagement on these issues," end quote. It also goes on to note Hussen's officials were pleased with a framework for the group that had apparently been provided previously by the Department of Homeland Security and wanted to work together to, quote, "formulate a work plan that could be agreed upon," end quote. So they really want this fixed, but Hussen, of course, has other ideas. But the documents do not make clear whether the Safe Third Country Agreement would be one of the, quote, "immigration issues" up for discussion at the proposed steering committee between the two governments, and the Canadian officials have not responded to requests to confirm whether it was ever actually created. Global News reached out to Hussen's office asking for comment, but was directed to contact Border Security and Organized Crime Minister Bill Blair, the nincompoop. Responsibility for the Safe Third Country Agreement and any changes to it were assigned to Blair last fall. Yeah. Since then, Blair has said that he sent a letter to Nielsen asking to engage American officials on ways to, quote, "improve and enhance the Safe Third Country Agreement." But he has, like Hussen, not been publicly critical of whether the deal is actually working. Global News reached out to his office with 3 specific questions for the minister. What is the status of talks on the agreement? Does Blair believe the agreement is still working as intended? And for more information on the proposed steering committee. His office did not provide any specifics. Canada has a long and proud tradition of providing protection to the world's most vulnerable people. Ultimately, this is an issue of fairness and making sure the rules are being properly followed to uphold the integrity of our shared border, wrote Marie-Emmanuelle Cadu, press secretary for Blair, in an email. The STCA remains an important tool for Canada and the United States to work together on the orderly handling of asylum claims made in our countries. Email goes on to say. Cadu continued, adding that Blair has met with representatives from the Department of Homeland Security and United States senators, bet they've got a D by their name, and continues to engage with Nielsen to discuss issues related to our commitment to securing our perimeter. Yeah. When pressed for more specifics, Cadu acknowledged that we are in a different environment than we were when the agreement was signed in 2004. Quote. That is a quote. But would not specifically address the question of whether the agreement is working as intended. Yeah, I'll say we're in a different environment. In 2004, we didn't have a whole slew of illegals that we do now. Thanks, Trudeau. Minister, quote, Minister Blair is in discussion with his United States counterparts to address the loophole that permits people to avoid the provisions in the STCA and improve the way the, quote, anchor relative exception is defined and applied, she said. That exception allows relatives of illegal migrants with unprocessed claims to use the illegal migrants' claim to effectively anchor their own asylum application when they in turn appear at the border. So basically, chain migration has come to Canada. Goodbye merit system that the rest of the world, especially the United States, so envied. Cadu did not respond to a third request for answers on the status of the steering committee. So there you have it, folks. It's broken, but of course we always knew that. Now we know officially. As I said, now I have the Conservatives' response to this via Michelle Rempel's video on her YouTube channel.
Global News just released explosive new documents that show that Justin Trudeau and his government knew about what was happening by them completely ignoring the Safe Third Country Agreement and enabling illegal border crossers to come into Canada, that they knew that this was creating a draw into Canada's system and allowing the abuse of our asylum system, and still they did nothing about it. So I just read a news story. It was just released by Global News, and the title of the article is "The Safe Third Country Agreement is no longer working as intended, memo reveals." So this is a memo that was obtained through an access to information request, I believe, by Global News, where it shows that the department officials within the government warned Justin Trudeau and his government and his ministers repeatedly that the agreement that we have with the United States, that Safe Third Country Agreement that prevents people from claiming asylum in one of our countries after having already reached the other, was not being properly managed and was actually creating what we call a pull factor into Canada. Now, this of course is the Captain Obvious statement to end all Captain Obvious statements, that if we weren't enforcing this agreement because of this loophole at illegal points of entry, that people are going to abuse it. Of course, how many times have I said this to you over the last, several years? But here's the thing. This document shows that Justin Trudeau was willfully ignoring the advice of government officials and willfully enabling the abuse of our asylum system, but at the same time, by doing this, willfully allowing those who are in dire need around the world, who are waiting to come to Canada, that are, have far more dire claims to come to Canada, at their expense, but also at your expense as Canadian taxpayers. Now, we know that the cost of Justin Trudeau ignoring this advice over the last couple of years has been hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We know that just a couple of short months ago, Justin Trudeau had to put another $114 million onto Canada's deficit because he needed to pay for the hotel rooms and social welfare payments for people that were in the United States of America in upstate New York who were illegally entering Canada and claiming that they were persecuted. That is not what our asylum system was intended to do, and that is not what those tax dollars should be supporting. So I think it's really important to note here that at this point in time, Justin Trudeau can't claim that he didn't know what was going on. I mean, these documents show that his own department, his own government was saying, hey, you got to fix this. This is creating the abuse of our system. And he ignored that advice. So what is he doing here? I mean, at this point in time, I think it's pretty clear what he's done. Justin Trudeau has purposely created, by ignoring this advice and ignoring all of our requests, a new express entry system into Canada. That express entry system is illegally crossing the border from the United States into Canada, getting a hotel room at taxpayer expense, waiting for years to have your asylum claim processed, and in the meantime being able to claim social welfare payments, subsidized housing. I mean, there's a question in Quebec if they can claim free daycare, all at taxpayer expense. This is not what our asylum system was designed for, but Justin Trudeau has now created an express entry system into Canada for this. Now, at the same time, Justin Trudeau has not done anything to clear the backlogs that are in streams of entry for people who are legitimately trying to come into the country through the front door. He hasn't done any sort of review or reform of the processing on these asylum claims. What Justin Trudeau's failure to manage our borders has done. It's created a huge deficit, a huge unfair system, and frankly, I think it's eroding public support for immigration in Canada, which is, you know, when we talk about division and polarization, that's Justin Trudeau's fault on this file by not taking this advice. He knew about this. They were warning him, and still he chose to create this express entry system. So what are Canada's Conservatives going to do differently when we form government in October? First of all, Canada's immigration system has to be brought back to fairness and order. And that has to start first and foremost by ensuring people that are illegally entering our country after having reached the safety of upstate New York do not have priority express entry access into our country and have the ability to abuse Canada's asylum system. That has to stop. There are numerous ways that we can do this. There are numerous ways that Justin Trudeau could have done this, but he has chosen not to do this because he supports this system. That's very clear. His inaction is an action. He has chosen to take action by allowing this to happen, and Canada's Conservatives would put an end to this. Make sure you read the story. I've included the link at the top of this post. It's shocking. It is shocking. It is crazy, and it underscores the fact that Justin Trudeau, I think, frankly, has had an agenda to weaken and abuse our asylum system. Because when you ignore advice like this, it's for a reason, and it's for a purpose. And in recent months, we have seen just how far Justin Trudeau will go for political purposes. This needs to stop, and Justin Trudeau needs to go. We'll continue fighting Justin Trudeau and his majority Liberal government and this type of detrimental policy as hard as we can. But the time is now coming very closely for you as Canadians to make sure that he's held to account when an election comes. I'm going to keep working and holding him to account, but at this point in time, this abuse of our asylum system, this erosion for support of immigration in Canada because of his failures, the fact that he is costing, people whose lives are in jeopardy the opportunity to come to Canada, because he is costing Canadian taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars because he's allowing the use of our asylum system, all of that needs to stop, and he needs to not have a platform to be able to do this to our country anymore. Working hard for you. Have a great day.
Well, that's all I have for today. Like if you like, share, comment, and of course, subscribe. And remember, working together, we can help keep Canada free. Thank you, and have a good day.